It was a crisp autumn evening in the suburban outskirts of Richmond, Virginia. The sun had just dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. Officer Dan Richards, a 10-year veteran of the Richmond Police Department, was in his patrol car, scanning the quiet neighborhood streets for any signs of trouble. He had a reputation in the department as being particularly tough on crime, but there were whispers among his colleagues about his aggressive tactics and questionable judgment when it came to people of color. On this particular evening, Officer Richards noticed a sleek black sedan cruising slightly above the speed limit. The car was a stark contrast to the modest family vehicles and aging pickups that typically roam the local roads. His instincts kicking into gear, he flicked on his siren and followed the car, noting the out-of-state license plate as he keyed the microphone of his radio. "Dispatch, this is Unit 22. I'm pulling over a black sedan, Virginia tags, on Willow Creek Road. Over." "Copy that, Unit 22. Do you require backup?" the dispatcher responded. "Negative, dispatch. Just a routine check," Richards replied, his voice calm but firm. The sedan pulled over smoothly, the engine humming quietly as it idled on the side of the road. Officer Richards approached the vehicle, his hand instinctively resting on his holster. He tapped on the tinted driver's side window with his flashlight. The window rolled down, revealing a black man in his early 30s, dressed in a sharp gray suit, his expression unreadable. "Good evening, sir. License and registration, please," Richards said, trying to peer into the car. The driver reached into his jacket pocket, slowly pulling out his wallet and a badge. "Officer, I believe there's been a misunderstanding. I'm Agent Malcolm Turner, FBI. I'm here on official business." Richards paused, his eyes narrowing as he took in the badge and ID presented to him. It was not uncommon for federal agents to be in the area, given Richmond's proximity to the capital, but something didn't sit right with him. "Is there a problem, officer?" Agent Turner asked, his voice calm but authoritative. "Just doing my job, sir." "You were speeding," Richards retorted, not willing to back down just yet. "I see. Well, I apologize for the slight overspeeding, but as I mentioned, I'm here on urgent business. Perhaps we can resolve this quickly." Richards took a moment to consider his options. Letting Turner go could mean overlooking a legitimate infraction, but pressing the issue could escalate things unnecessarily. He decided to check Turner's credentials one more time. After a few moments on his radio and a quick call to verify, everything checked out. Agent Turner was, indeed, who he claimed to be, and his business in the area was legitimate. "Thank you for your cooperation, Agent Turner. You're free to go," Richards said reluctantly, handing back the documents. As Turner rolled up his window and prepared to drive away, Richards couldn't shake the feeling that this encounter was far from over. Little did he know this routine traffic stop would set in motion a series of events that would not only test his beliefs, but also his career. As the sedan disappeared into the gathering dusk, Richards returned to his cruiser, the weight of the evening's encounter settling heavily on his shoulders. What should have been a simple traffic stop had stirred something deep within him, a sense of foreboding that he couldn't quite shake. The following day at the Richmond FBI field office, Agent Malcolm Turner was absorbed in his current case, poring over files and surveillance reports that sprawled across his desk. His thoughts, however, kept drifting back to the traffic stop from the previous evening. It was a minor incident in the grand scheme of things, but the officer's demeanor had left a lasting impression on him. Malcolm decided to take a closer look at Officer Richards' record, suspecting that his own experience might not have been an isolated incident. As an FBI agent specializing in civil rights investigations, he had access to a range of databases and resources that could shed light on any patterns of behavior that might indicate a deeper problem. He found several complaints lodged against Richards over the years, mostly from minority individuals accusing the officer of racial profiling and excessive force. Although none of the complaints had resulted in disciplinary action, the pattern was concerning. Malcolm compiled the data, his mind racing with the implications of his findings. This could potentially be a significant case, highlighting systemic issues within the Richmond Police Department. Meanwhile, Officer Richards was on patrol, his mind replaying the traffic stop with Agent Turner. He couldn't shake the feeling that he'd been challenged, and it gnawed at him. Determined to assert his authority, he was more vigilant than ever, his eyes scanning the streets for any infraction, no matter how minor. His radio crackled to life. "Unit 22, we have a report of a suspicious person near the intersection of 3rd and Elm. Please investigate." Richards responded immediately, the adrenaline starting to flow. As he drove to the location, he spotted a young black man standing alone by the roadside, looking around nervously. Without hesitation, Richards pulled over and approached the man. "Evening, what are you doing out here?" Richards asked, his tone more accusatory than inquisitive. The man looked startled by the sudden confrontation. "I'm just waiting for a friend, sir." Richards eyed him skeptically. "Got any ID on you?" Back at the FBI office, Malcolm's investigation was gaining momentum. He reached out to his contacts in the Department of Justice, discussing the possibility of initiating a formal inquiry into the Richmond Police Department. The evidence was mounting, and Malcolm knew he had to act quickly. As he prepared his report, his phone rang. It was his superior, Agent Johnson. "Malcolm, I've heard about your findings. Let's proceed cautiously. We need to ensure we have irrefutable evidence before we move forward." Malcolm acknowledged the advice, but he felt a sense of urgency. This was not just about one officer. It was about challenging a potentially widespread culture of discrimination and abuse of power. His resolve hardened. This case could be a turning point for the community. In the dim light of his office, Agent Malcolm Turner was deeply engrossed in assembling his findings. Maps pinned with various incidents involving Officer Dan Richards covered one wall, each pin representing a story, a complaint, a moment of fear. Malcolm's desk was strewn with interview transcripts, complaint reports, and legal pads filled with his meticulous notes. As he worked, his phone buzzed, a message from an informant in the community suggesting a covert meeting. The informant claimed to have direct experiences and witness accounts that could substantiate the complaints against Officer Richards. Eager for any leads that could bolster his case, Malcolm arranged to meet at a discreet location in a quiet cafe on the outskirts of town. Across town, Officer Richards was patrolling his usual beat. His recent encounter with Agent Turner had left him with a heightened sense of defiance. He felt scrutinized, underappreciated for his efforts to maintain law and order. As he drove, his radio remained quiet, the silence amplifying his growing resentment towards what he perceived as undue interference in police work. At the cafe, Malcolm met with his informant, a middle-aged woman named Lila, who had lived in Richmond all her life. With a cautious glance around, Lila shared her observations and the stories she had collected from neighbors, tales of harassment and unwarranted traffic stops, mostly targeting young black men. Lila handed Malcolm a small stack of written testimonials, her hands trembling slightly. "I hope this helps," she whispered. "People are scared, but they're talking to you because they trust you'll do something about it." Malcolm assured her of his commitment, feeling the weight of the community's trust on his shoulders. The testimonials were a goldmine of information, each one a thread in the larger tapestry of systemic issues he was beginning to uncover. Later that evening, as Malcolm reviewed the new evidence, he received another call, this time from a young man willing to come forward about a particularly violent encounter with Officer Richards. The man, named Dayon, agreed to meet Malcolm the next day to provide a formal statement. This testimony, Malcolm knew, could be crucial in establishing a pattern of behavior necessary to bring formal charges. Meanwhile, Officer Richards ended his shift with a sense of unease. He returned to the station to find a memo from the Internal Affairs Department. He was being called in for a meeting to discuss several matters of concern. Richards knew this could be about the complaints against him, and he braced himself for a confrontation. He believed in his methods, justified in his mind by the results they produced, unaware of the gathering evidence that might soon challenge his entire career. As the city of Richmond settled into the night, both men prepared for the coming days, each in his own way laying groundwork for a confrontation that seemed increasingly inevitable. Early the next morning, the streets of Richmond were bathed in the soft light of dawn, casting long shadows on the sidewalks. Agent Malcolm Turner was already awake, sipping his coffee as he reviewed his notes for the upcoming meeting with Dion. The gravity of the situation was not lost on him. Every piece of testimony was crucial and needed to be handled with the utmost care to ensure its validity and impact. In a modest apartment on the north side of the city, Dayon paced nervously, rehearsing what he would say to Malcolm. The encounter with Officer Richards had left deep scars, and revisiting the details was a painful process. However, Dayon knew his story could make a difference, possibly preventing others from enduring similar ordeals. At the Richmond Police Department, Officer Richards was preparing for his meeting with Internal Affairs. He meticulously organized his patrol reports and performance reviews, intending to present a strong defense of his actions. Richards was confident in his record and felt prepared to counter any allegations with evidence of his effectiveness as a law enforcement officer. Malcolm and Dayon met at a secluded park, sitting at a bench tucked away among tall oaks. The air was crisp, and the usual park sounds seemed to recede, giving them a bubble of privacy. Dayon spoke softly, but with a firmness born of resolve. He described the night he was stopped by Richards, the aggressive questioning and the unnecessary force that was used. Malcolm recorded every word, his expression somber. As the interview progressed, Malcolm's phone vibrated silently in his pocket. He glanced at the caller ID. Agent Johnson was calling, likely with updates regarding the broader investigation. Excusing himself, Malcolm stepped away to take the call. His back turned to Dayon, who looked on, clutching the armrest of the bench, his anxiety visible. Agent Johnson's voice was low but urgent, informing Malcolm of another development. A recent audit of the Richmond Police Department had uncovered discrepancies in reporting incidents involving use of force. This audit could potentially link to Richards's case, providing a broader context for systemic issues within the department. Back at the station, Officer Richards entered the Internal Affairs office, greeted coldly by a panel of senior officers. The room felt colder than usual, the fluorescent lights harsh against the stark white walls. As the questions began, Richards maintained his composure, answering each query with a rehearsed precision. However, the atmosphere grew increasingly tense, the officers' skepticism apparent in their probing questions. Both Malcolm and Richards were deeply immersed in their respective battles, one striving to uncover the truth, the other to defend his version of it. The city of Richmond, with its complex tapestry of community and law enforcement, watched on, a silent observer to the unfolding drama. The sun had barely risen when Agent Malcolm Turner arrived at the FBI field office, his mind teeming with the details from his conversation with Dayon. With every witness statement, the picture became clearer, painting a troubling portrait of Officer Dan Richards' conduct. Malcolm spread out the latest testimonies on his desk alongside the earlier evidence, each document a piece of the puzzle. As Malcolm delved deeper into the case, he orchestrated a broader canvassing effort, reaching out to community leaders and setting up confidential meetings. His aim was to ensure that every voice was heard, every incident documented. The community's trust in law enforcement was at stake, and he was determined to restore balance and accountability. Meanwhile, the atmosphere at the Richmond Police Department was charged with tension. After his grueling session with Internal Affairs, Officer Richards felt isolated, his colleagues' glances now questioning, the camaraderie once taken for granted slowly evaporating. The Internal Affairs investigation was not just a professional challenge, it was becoming a personal crisis for Richards, who began to question his own actions and decisions. Later that day, Richards sought solace in the routine of patrol, but the streets he once navigated with confidence now seemed fraught with scrutiny. Each interaction with the public was measured, his usual assertiveness tempered by the looming investigation. In another part of the city, Malcolm met with a civil rights attorney to discuss the legal implications of the case. They pored over the gathered affidavits and incident reports, strategizing on the best approach to leverage this evidence in court, should it come to that. The attorney, seasoned in civil rights litigation, advised Malcolm on the nuances of federal versus local jurisdictions, a complex overlay of legal considerations that could influence the outcome of their efforts. As the day drew to a close, Malcolm received an encrypted email from a contact within another federal agency, hinting at additional undisclosed incidents involving Richards that had been flagged during a separate investigation. This new lead promised more depth to the narrative, potentially reinforcing the pattern of behavior that Malcolm was painstakingly documenting. Back at his apartment, Richards found solace in solitude, away from the prying eyes of his colleagues. He spent the evening reflecting on his career, the decisions that brought him to this juncture, and the impact of his actions on the community he had sworn to protect. The solitude offered little comfort, the walls of his home echoing with the repercussions of the day's revelations. The city, a mosaic of light and shadow as evening fell, seemed to hold its breath, awaiting the outcome of this high-stakes confrontation between law enforcement and the pursuit of justice. Early morning light filtered through the blinds of Agent Malcolm Turner's office, illuminating the stacks of documents that chronicled his investigation into Officer Dan Richards. The day promised a critical juncture in his work, as Malcolm prepared to present his findings to the federal prosecutors. His office was a hive of activity, with junior agents and legal analysts reviewing the dossier for the umpteenth time, ensuring no detail was overlooked. As preparations continued, Malcolm received a call from a contact at the local news station, an investigative reporter interested in the growing tension between the FBI and the Richmond Police Department. Sensing an opportunity to amplify the case's visibility and public impact, Malcolm agreed to provide an off-the-record briefing, carefully navigating the delicate balance between transparency and the integrity of the ongoing investigation. Meanwhile, at his home, Officer Richards prepared for his day in a different way. He met with his union representative, a robust man with a keen understanding of police procedures and legal defenses. Together, they reviewed the potential strategies to counter the allegations. Richards's resolve hardened with each discussion, his belief in his own righteousness bolstered by the support of his representative. In a quiet diner on the edge of town, Malcolm met with his informant, Lila, once more. She brought with her two more individuals, former residents of the neighborhoods Richards patrolled, each with their own stories of encounters that left them wary of police presence. Their testimonies were quietly recorded, their voices adding to the chorus of accounts Malcolm had gathered. After the meeting, he escorted them individually to their cars, ensuring their safety in a climate of growing tension and unease. Back at the FBI field office, Malcolm convened a meeting with his team. They arranged the evidence on a large digital screen, timelines syncing incidents with Richards' patrol logs, annotated maps displaying patterns of stops, and statistical data comparing Richards' activities with departmental averages. The room buzzed with the energy of focused purpose, each member of the team contributing to the narrative they were building. Simultaneously, Richards was summoned to a discreet meeting with the police chief, a stern figure who had risen through the ranks by adhering strictly to protocol. The chief was blunt, informing Richards of the mounting pressure from both the public and federal levels. He made it clear that the department could only shield Richards to a certain extent without compromising its own credibility. As the day wound down, the city of Richmond carried on, oblivious to the meticulous orchestration of legal and investigative maneuvers happening behind closed office doors and in quiet, unassuming diners. Each player in this unfolding drama moved with deliberate intent, their actions weaving through the fabric of the city's complex relationship with its protectors. The morning buzz of Richmond was tinged with an electric undercurrent of anticipation as Agent Malcolm Turner made his way to the federal courthouse. His briefcase was heavier than usual, laden with affidavits, evidence binders, and digital recordings, the culmination of months of meticulous investigation. Today, he was scheduled to present a preliminary report to a panel of federal judges, a crucial step in determining the trajectory of potential charges against Officer Dan Richards. Inside the courthouse, the corridors echoed with the footsteps of lawyers, plaintiffs, and defendants, a cacophony that underscored the gravity of the day's agendas. Malcolm's presence was a signal to many that the FBI was taking a serious, active role in local law enforcement oversight, a notion that brought comfort to some and consternation to others. Meanwhile, Officer Richards was on duty, patrolling neighborhoods he knew like the back of his hand, though today they seemed alien. Every glance thrown his way felt accusatory, every greeting strained. He responded to calls mechanically, his interactions perfunctory. The weight of the impending judicial review loomed large, rendering his usual vigilance somewhat subdued. In another part of the city, a local community center hosted a meeting organized by civic leaders and activists, galvanized by the case against Richards. The room was filled with residents eager to share their experiences and seek guidance on how to engage with the investigation constructively. Flyers with Malcolm's contact information were distributed, encouraging direct communication with the FBI. Malcolm's presentation to the judges was detailed and precise. He outlined the patterns of behavior exhibited by Richards, supported by data and corroborated by eyewitness accounts. The judges listened intently, their expressions unreadable, their notes frequent. The session extended over several hours, with periodic breaks during which Malcolm consulted quietly with his team, adjusting his approach as needed. As the courthouse clock marked the passing of the afternoon, reporters gathered outside, their cameras and microphones poised to capture any statement from Malcolm or his team. The public's interest in the case had grown, fueled by leaks and the relentless cycle of news coverage. The stakes were public and personal, the community's trust hanging in the balance. Simultaneously, in a stark contrast to the bustling courthouse, the community center's meeting continued with passionate testimonies from local residents. Their voices filled the room, some trembling with emotion, others steady with resolve. The collective narrative that emerged was one of a community eager for change and accountability. As evening approached, Malcolm exited the courthouse, his face giving away little of the day's strains. He was met by flashes of cameras and a barrage of questions from reporters, to which he responded with practiced diplomacy, revealing nothing that could jeopardize the integrity of the proceedings. The day ended with no respite for those involved, each player retreating to their respective corners of the city. Richmond, a witness to these converging paths, watched as its citizens navigated the complexities of justice and reform. As dawn broke over Richmond, the city awoke to a palpable sense of anticipation. Today was the day the federal prosecutors would announce whether they would pursue a formal indictment against Officer Dan Richards. The decision had been deferred following Malcolm's detailed presentation, pending a final review of all submissions. Agent Malcolm Turner arrived early at his office, the morning light casting long shadows across the floor. He spent the morning in quiet contemplation, reviewing his notes and preparing himself for any outcome. His commitment to the case was unwavering, but he understood the complexities of the legal system and the unpredictability of judicial processes. Across town, Officer Richards was off duty, sitting alone in his living room. The silence of the house was a stark contrast to the tumult of his thoughts. He had spent the night reviewing his years of service, each commendation and every reprimand, trying to reconcile the image of the officer he believed he was with the one portrayed by the FBI's investigation. At noon, the community gathered in front of the federal courthouse, a crowd of diverse faces, some anxious, some hopeful, all waiting for the announcement. News vans lined the streets, their satellite dishes pointed skyward, ready to broadcast the decision to a wider audience. Inside the courthouse, Malcolm stood with his team in a corridor, waiting for the signal to enter the courtroom. The air was thick with tension, each member of the team feeling the weight of their collective effort. The moment arrived, and as they filed into the courtroom, Malcolm's gaze met Richards, who was already seated with his legal team. There was no malice in their exchange, only the mutual recognition of the gravity of their situation. The prosecutor, a seasoned attorney with a reputation for fairness, stepped up to the podium. The room fell silent as she began to speak, detailing the findings of the investigation and the rationale for their decision. We have reviewed the evidence presented by the FBI and weighed it against the testimonies of Officer Richards and his representatives. After considerable deliberation, we have decided to proceed with an indictment. We believe there is sufficient evidence to warrant a trial where a jury can hear the case in full. The courtroom erupted in a cacophony of reactions, murmurs of approval, gasps of surprise, and subdued whispers. Richards's face remained impassive, though his posture betrayed a slight sag of resignation. As the crowd outside received the news, the reactions were mixed. Some cheered, feeling validated in their grievances against police practices. Others were more reflective, understanding the complexity of such a case and what it meant for their community. Malcolm stepped outside the courthouse to a sea of microphones and cameras. He spoke earnestly about the importance of transparency and accountability, not just in Richmond, but across all branches of law enforcement. The day faded into evening, and the city of Richmond continued its routine, now marked by a significant moment in its history. Change was on the horizon, but it would not be swift or easy. For Malcolm, the day ended with a quiet resolve to continue his work, knowing that today's decision was just a part of a larger battle for justice and equity.